For 3 years, I watched the woman I love fade away. We thought it was dementia. We thought it was just the cruel passage of time stealing her mind piece by piece. But when my daughter stepped out of the neurologist's office to take a phone call, the doctor didn't talk to me about treatment plans or memory care facilities. He walked to the door, locked it, and whispered 4 words that stopped my heart cold. Get her away now. My wife wasn't sick. She was being erased. And the person holding the eraser was the one standing right outside the door, waiting for us to sign over everything. Before I tell you how a 71-year-old retired engineer went to war with his own flesh and blood, hit that like button and subscribe if you believe that marriage vows mean protecting each other until the very end. Let me know in the comments which city you are watching from. She did not want to be here. She wanted to be closing a deal on a penthouse or meeting friends for cocktails, not sitting in a sterile room with her aging parents. I looked at Beatrice, my wife of 45 years. She was slumped in her wheelchair, staring at a spot on the wall, with that vacant, glassy look that had become her new normal. Her hands, once steady enough to paint intricate watercolors, were resting on her lap, trembling slightly. Every time I saw that tremor, it felt like a structural failure in my own chest. I reached out and covered her cold hand with mine. She did not squeeze back. She did not even blink. Dr. Aris Thorne sat across from us, typing silently on his computer. He was a new specialist, the third one we had seen this year. Nicole had insisted on changing doctors again, claiming the previous one was incompetent because he hadn't seen enough decline to justify increasing her medication. That should have been my first warning sign. A structural engineer like me should have noticed the cracks in the foundation. But when it is your own daughter telling you she just wants the best for mom, you tend to turn off your critical thinking. Nicole's phone buzzed aggressively on the glass table. She snatched it up, looking at the screen with a flash of irritation that she quickly smoothed over with a practiced smile. "Daddy." "I have to take this," she said, her voice pitching up into that sweet, helpful tone she used whenever she wanted something. "It is the buyer for the Lakeshore Drive property. I will just step out for a minute. You and Dr. Thorne can wrap up, right?" I nodded, adjusting the receiver in my ear. "Go ahead, sweetie. We will be fine." She stood up, smoothing out her skirt, and patted my shoulder. It felt patronizing, like how you would pat a dog you were about to put in a kennel. "Make sure you ask him about the updated prescription," she added, her eyes lingering on the doctor for a second too long, before she turned and clicked her heels out of the room. The heavy oak door closed with a soft thud. I expected Dr. Thorne to continue typing, or to start the usual speech about progression and palliative care. Instead, the atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The air went cold. Dr. Thorne stopped typing. He stood up, but he didn't look at his files. He looked at the door. Then he did something that made the hair on my arms stand up. He walked over to the entrance and turned the deadbolt lock. Click. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. My engineer's brain immediately calculated the threat. Why was he locking us in? I tightened my grip on the armrest of my chair, preparing to defend Beatrice, though I wasn't sure what an old man with bad knees could do against a man half his age. Dr. Thorne rushed back to us, but he didn't sit down. He knelt beside my chair, putting himself at eye level. His hands were shaking. This man was a professional neurologist, a specialist in the human brain, and he was terrified. He leaned in close to my left ear, the one where my hearing aid usually whistled if someone got too close. But he knew exactly how to pitch his voice. Low, urgent, deadly serious. "Mr. Foster." "Look at me," he whispered. "Do not look at the door. Look at me." I met his eyes. They were wide with panic. "You need to listen to me very carefully," he hissed, his breath hitching. "I ran the full toxicology panel you asked about last time, the one your daughter tried to cancel." I frowned. I hadn't asked for a toxicology panel. I opened my mouth to say so, but he cut me off with a sharp shake of his head. Her blood is saturated with haloperidol, Mr. Foster. The levels are 5 times the maximum safe dosage for a woman of her age and weight. The word hung in the air like toxic smoke. Haloperidol. I wasn't a doctor, but I read everything. I spent my nights on forums and medical websites trying to understand why my brilliant wife was fading so fast. Haloperidol was an antipsychotic. It was used for severe schizophrenia for violent patients in psych wards. It was absolutely not meant for a gentle woman with early-stage memory loss. What I stammered, my voice trembling. But she is on Aricept. For the memory, no, Dr. Thorne said, gripping my arm. That is what the bottle says. But that is not what is in her blood. Haloperidol causes rigid muscles, tremors, confusion, and a catatonic state. He gestured to Beatrice. I looked at my wife. The tremors in her hands, the rigidity in her posture, the way she stared at nothing trapped inside her own body. She does not have Alzheimer's. Harold, the doctor, whispered, his voice breaking. She is being chemically lobotomized. The symptoms are all artificial. If she takes another dose, her heart will stop. My world stopped spinning. It tilted on its axis and crashed. For 3 years. 3 years of watching her forget our anniversary. 3 years of watching her forget how to cook her famous lasagna. 3 years of feeding her pills that Nicole brought over every Sunday, labeled in those neat little organizers. Nicole. My stomach churned, a violent mix of nausea and rage. My daughter. The little girl I taught to ride a bike. The woman I walked down the aisle. She was doing this. Why? I choked out. Dr. Thorne glanced at the door again. I do not know why, but I know that when I mentioned reducing her medication last week, your daughter threatened to report me to the medical board. She wants your wife sedated. She wants her incompetent. You need to get her out of that house. You need to keep her away from your daughter. A sudden rage, hot and blinding, surged through my veins. It wasn't the slow burn of old age. It was the volatile fire of a man who realizes his sanctuary has been invaded. I started to stand up. I wanted to tear that door open. I wanted to grab Nicole by her designer collar and scream until the police came. Dr. Thorne pushed me back down. No. You cannot react. Not here. Not now. Why not? I hissed. She is killing my wife. Because she has the medical proxy, Thorne whispered frantically. If you make a scene, she will claim you are having a senile episode. She will have you committed or removed from care. She has the paperwork, Harold. I saw it in the file. If you fight her openly right now, you lose. And if you lose, Beatrice dies. The truth of his words hit me harder than the diagnosis. He was right. To the outside world, I was just a retired engineer with hearing aids and a slow walk. Nicole was the vibrant, successful real estate agent who sacrificed everything to care for her aging parents. Who would they believe, the successful daughter or the confused old man? The doorknob rattled. We both froze. Doctor. Thorne scrambled back to his desk, his face pale. He unlocked the drawer and pulled out a prescription pad, his hands shaking so hard he dropped his pen. I sat back, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked at Beatrice. She was still staring at the wall, oblivious to the fact that her husband had just found out she was being murdered. I took a deep breath. I had spent 40 years building skyscrapers. I knew that when the wind howled and the earth shook, you didn't stiffen up. You swayed. You adapted. You survived the stress test. I needed to become exactly what Nicole thought I was. The lock clicked open. Nicole breezed back into the room, bringing a gust of expensive perfume that barely masked the smell of antiseptic. She was smiling, that tight, practiced smile she used on clients who were asking too many questions. Sorry about that, she said, tucking her phone into her bag. Just a minor crisis with the escrow. You know how it is. She looked at me, then at the doctor. The silence in the room was heavy, thick with the secrets we had just exchanged. Her eyes narrowed slightly. A predator sensing a change in the wind. Is everything okay? You two look serious, she asked, her voice dropping an octave. This was the moment. The fork in the road. I could scream, I could accuse her, and I would lose everything. Or I could play the role she had written for me. I let my shoulders slump. I let my mouth hang open slightly, giving my face that slack, confused look I hated seeing in the mirror. I reached up and fiddled with my hearing aid, making it emit a high-pitched squeal. What I asked loudly, too loudly. Did you say escrow or Velcro? I can't hear a damn thing in this room. The buzzing is terrible. Nicole's tension evaporated. She rolled her eyes, a gesture of annoyance that she didn't even bother to hide anymore. Escrow, Dad. Never mind. She turned to the doctor. So, Dr. Thorne, we are done here, right? I have the papers for the updated care plan in the car, but I also brought the durable power of attorney forms. Since Mom is clearly getting worse and Dad is, well, you see how he is. We need to expedite the transfer of authority. She pulled a blue folder from under her arm. That blue folder. I had seen it on her kitchen counter last week. It wasn't just medical power of attorney. It was financial, total control. Harold Dr. Thorne said, his voice steady now, though I could see sweat on his forehead. I am writing a new prescription. It is just a vitamin compound to help with hydration. He handed the slip of paper to me, not Nicole. His eyes locked with mine for a second. It was a silent pact. Make sure she drinks plenty of water, Mr. Foster, he said. I took the paper with a shaking hand. My tremor wasn't fake. I was looking at the monster who shared my DNA. She stood there tapping her folder against her hip, waiting for us to die so she could cash out. Okay, Doc, I mumbled, stuffing the paper into my pocket. Come on, Beatrice. Let's go get some ice cream. Ice cream, Nicole scoffed. Dad, it is 10 degrees outside, and Mom is lactose intolerant. God, you are getting worse every day. Maybe I am, I muttered, standing up and gripping the handles of Beatrice's wheelchair. Maybe I am just a confused old man. But as I pushed my wife past my daughter, I made a silent vow. I wasn't confused. I was awake. And for the first time in 3 years, I had a mission. I wasn't just a husband anymore. I was an engineer looking at a faulty structure, and I was going to bring the whole damn house down on top of her. We walked out into the biting Chicago wind. Nicole walked ahead of us, talking on her phone again, probably spending money she didn't have yet. She didn't offer to help push the chair. I looked down at Beatrice. The cold air seemed to wake her up just a fraction. She blinked and looked up at me. Harry, she whispered. I am here, Bea, I said, leaning down. I am right here, and I know what is wrong. She didn't understand, but she squeezed my finger. A tiny, weak squeeze. But it was enough. Nicole turned back to us as we reached her SUV. Hurry up, Dad. I have a showing at 4, and Magda is waiting at home to give Mom her afternoon dose. Magda, the new nurse, the one with the cold hands and the dead eyes, the one who administered the poison. We are coming, I called out. I helped Beatrice into the car. As I folded the wheelchair, I touched the prescription paper in my pocket. It wasn't a prescription. I could feel the texture of a note folded inside. Dr. Thorne had slipped me something else. I got into the back seat with my wife, leaving Nicole in the front like a chauffeur. As we pulled away into the gray traffic, I looked at the back of my daughter's head. She thought she was driving us to our end. She didn't know she was driving a Trojan horse back into her fortress. The war had started in a doctor's office, but it was going to end in the home I built. And I promised myself one thing: by the time I was done, only one of us would be left standing, and it wasn't going to be the one with the blue folder. The drive back to the house was suffocating. The silence in the car felt heavy, like the air before a tornado touches down. I sat in the back with Beatrice holding her cold hand while Nicole drove with a terrifying calmness. She hummed along to the radio, tapping her fingers on the steering wheel, completely unbothered by the fact that she had just tried to gaslight a doctor into sedating her mother. I looked out the window at the familiar streets of our neighborhood. We had lived here for 40 years. I knew every pothole, every tree, every neighbor. But as we turned onto our driveway, the house I had designed and built with my own hands looked different. It did not look like a home anymore. It looked like a fortress, and I was on the wrong side of the moat. Nicole parked the car and killed the engine. She did not move to help us immediately. She sat there for a moment, typing something on her phone. Probably texting her husband Derek. Probably telling him the plan was proceeding. I got out and unfolded the wheelchair, my joints aching in the damp Chicago air. I lifted Beatrice from the car seat. She was so light now. It felt like holding a bird made of hollow bones. I settled her into the chair and wheeled her up the front walkway. The concrete pavers I had laid myself in 1982 were cracked in a few places, and usually that would bother me. Today, I barely noticed. My eyes were fixed on the front door. I reached into my pocket for my keys. I had carried the same brass key on my ring since the day we moved in. It was worn smooth by my thumb, a talisman of ownership and security. I reached for the lock, but my hand hit smooth plastic instead of cold metal. I stopped. The solid brass deadbolt was gone. In its place was a sleek black electronic keypad with a glowing blue screen. It looked like something you would see on a high-security office building, not a suburban family home. I stared at it, my key hovering uselessly in the air. Nicole came up behind me, her heels clicking sharply on the pavement. She reached past me, her perfume clouding my senses, and punched a 6-digit code into the keypad. Beep, 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 beep. The mechanical whir of the lock disengaging sounded harsh and final. I thought the lock was sticking, she said casually, pushing the door open. Derek and I decided to upgrade it. It is safer this way. You do not have to worry about losing your keys anymore, Dad. I did not lose my keys, I wanted to say. I have never lost my keys in my life. I am a structural engineer. I value access and security above almost everything else. But I swallowed the words. I looked at the keypad. I memorized the tone of the beeps. I watched her fingers, but she moved too fast. I did not catch the code. Safe, I muttered, trying to sound confused as I wheeled Beatrice over the threshold. Safe for who? The inside of the house smelled wrong. It usually smelled of Beatrice's lavender potpourri and old books. Now it smelled of bleach and something stale like unwashed laundry. The furniture had been rearranged. My favorite reading chair was pushed into a corner, and the rug Beatrice loved was rolled up against the wall. Before I could ask why the living room looked like a staging area, a woman stepped out of the kitchen. She was tall, with broad shoulders and forearms that looked like they could wrestle a steer. She wore generic blue scrubs that were too tight across the chest, and her hair was pulled back in a severe, greasy bun. She did not smile. She looked at us the way a bouncer looks at a drunk patron. "This is Magda," Nicole said, dropping her keys on the console table. "The agency sent her over. She is going to help with Mom since you are having so much trouble." I looked at Magda. Her eyes were flat and hard. There was no compassion there, no warmth. This was not a caregiver. This was an enforcer. "Hello," Magda grunted. She walked over to the wheelchair, not asking for permission, and grabbed the handles. Her grip was rough. Beatrice flinched, a tiny movement that sent a spike of adrenaline through me. "Careful," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "She is fragile." Magda ignored me. She spun the chair around with practiced indifference. "Time for hygiene," she announced, pushing Beatrice toward the hallway. "Wait," I said, stepping forward. "I usually help her with her afternoon tea first. She likes to sit by the window." Nicole stepped in front of me, blocking my path. Her smile was gone. Her face was hard like stone. Mom needs a schedule, Dad. Magda knows what she is doing. You are just confusing things. Why don't you go sit down? You look tired. You look like you're about to fall over. I watched Magda push my wife down the hall. Beatrice turned her head slightly, looking back at me. Her eyes were wide, fearful. The bedroom door closed with a solid click. I stood there in the living room I had built, realizing with a sinking horror that I had lost control of my own territory. The walls felt like they were closing in. The ceiling felt lower. This wasn't my house anymore. It was a holding cell. I needed to call Dr. Thorne. I needed to tell him about the lock, about Magda, about the look in Nicole's eyes. I needed a strategy. I patted my jacket pocket for my smartphone. It wasn't there. I checked my pants. Nothing. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. I distinctly remembered putting it in my jacket before we left for the clinic. I turned to the side table where I usually left it, charging. The charger was there, the cord dangling like a severed artery, but the phone was gone. Nicole was in the kitchen pouring herself a glass of wine from one of my vintage bottles. She didn't ask if I wanted any. She took a long sip, leaning against the granite counter, watching me search. Looking for something, she asked. My phone, I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. I had it this morning. Oh, that, she said, reaching into her oversized purse. She pulled out an object and tossed it onto the counter. It slid across the granite and stopped in front of me. It was a phone, but it wasn't my smartphone. It was a gray, brick-like Nokia device with rubber buttons. A phone for seniors. A phone from 20 years ago. Your old one finally died. Dad, she said, taking another sip of wine. Screen went black. Battery wouldn't hold a charge. You were complaining about it last week, remember? I stared at the gray brick. I had never complained about my phone. It was a flagship model I bought 6 months ago to video chat with my old engineering buddies. It worked perfectly. I don't remember that, I stammered. See, Nicole sighed, shaking her head. Your memory is going just like Mom's. Anyway, I got you this one. It is simpler. Big buttons, loud ringer. You won't get confused by all those apps and touchscreens. I picked up the Nokia. It felt light and cheap in my hand. I pressed the power button. The screen lit up with a pixelated green glow. I went to the contacts menu. Empty. No Dr. Thorne, no lawyer, no friends. Just 2 numbers saved. Home. And Nicole. I looked up at her. She was watching me over the rim of her wineglass, her eyes challenging me, daring me to contradict her. If I argued, if I said my phone was fine, she would just use it as more proof of my dementia. Poor Dad, he thinks his broken phone works. He is paranoid. Thank you, I muttered, putting the brick in my pocket. It felt like a stone weighing me down. I am going to rest, I said. My legs hurt. Good idea, she said, turning her back to me to rinse her glass. Stay out of the way while Magda gets Mom settled. I walked slowly toward the hallway, exaggerating my limp. I did not go to the bedroom. I went to the study. This room was my sanctuary. It was where I drafted the blueprints for this house. It was where I kept my technical manuals, my awards, and my records. I closed the door softly behind me and locked it. It was a flimsy interior lock, one a child could pick with a hairpin, but it was the only barrier I had left. I moved quickly to the large oak bookshelf that covered the east wall. My heart was hammering against my ribs. The isolation was tightening around my throat. No phone, no keys. A guard dog in the bedroom. I needed to know the extent of the damage. I needed to know if I still had the resources to fight a war. I pulled out a thick volume on seismic retrofitting from the third shelf. Behind it, the wood paneling looked seamless to the naked eye. But I knew where to press. I found the hidden latch I had installed 15 years ago and pushed. A small section of the panel clicked and popped open, revealing a wall safe. My hands were shaking, not from age but from fear. I dialed the combination. Left to 32, right to 14, left to 88. The tumbler clicked. I pulled the heavy steel handle. The door swung open. I stopped breathing. The safe was supposed to contain the deed to the house, the titles to our 2 cars, my life insurance policy, and $40,000 in emergency cash that I had saved for a rainy day. It was empty. It wasn't just empty. It had been wiped clean. There wasn't even a dust bunny inside. The metal shelf gleamed under the desk lamp, mocking me. I fell back into my leather chair, the room spinning. They had taken everything. This wasn't just about medical control. This was a hostile takeover. Nicole and Derek had stripped us of our assets before Beatrice was even cold. They had the deed. They had the cash. They had the communication channels. I looked at the empty safe and then at the gray Nokia phone on the desk. I was trapped in my own home, stripped of my identity, my property, and my voice. I could hear Magda's heavy footsteps in the hallway above, pacing like a warden. Panic clawed at my chest. I wanted to smash the window and run. I wanted to scream for help, but the engineer in me took over. Panic is a structural weakness. Panic causes collapse. I forced myself to breathe. In, out, in, out. I looked at the empty safe again. They thought they had taken everything, but they had made a mistake. A critical calculation error. They assumed the value of this house was in the paper deed and the cash. They forgot who built it. They forgot that I knew every wire, every pipe, every hollow space in these walls. They had taken the surface, but they didn't own the structure. I closed the safe and pushed the book back into place. I sat in the dim light of the study, my hands gripping the armrests of my chair, until my knuckles turned white. They wanted a confused old man. Fine. I would give them the performance of a lifetime. But while they were watching the show, I would be undermining the foundation beneath their feet. I stood up, unlocked the study door, and shuffled back out into the hallway. I was going into the belly of the beast. I had to find a way to reach Dr. Thorne, and I had to do it without a phone, without a car, and without keys. The siege had begun, and I was the resistance. I walked toward the kitchen, my face a mask of senile indifference, while my mind sharpened into a weapon. The fortress was occupied, but the architect was still inside. Dinner that evening was a masterclass in tension. The dining room, which used to be filled with the sound of Beatrice laughing and the clinking of fine china, now felt like a boardroom where a hostile takeover was being finalized. We were eating takeout from a plastic container, some greasy stir-fry that Nicole had ordered without asking what we wanted. She sat at the head of the table, a spot that had belonged to me for 40 years. Derek sat to her right, and I was relegated to the side next to Beatrice's wheelchair. Magda stood in the corner like a sentinel, arms crossed over her chest, watching every bite my wife took with the intensity of a prison guard. I picked at my food, moving a piece of broccoli around to make it look like I was eating. My appetite had vanished the moment I saw the lock on the front door, but I knew I had to keep my strength up. I had to be sharp. I adjusted the volume on my hearing aid, turning it up to the maximum setting. The ambient noise of the refrigerator humming and the wind outside was deafening, but it allowed me to hear what I needed to hear. Nicole and Derek were trying to be discreet, keeping their voices low, assuming the old man next to them was lost in his own world of confusion. They were wrong. I heard every breath. I heard the way Derek's leg was bouncing under the table, a nervous, rapid tapping that vibrated through the floorboards. "I am telling you, the spread was supposed to cover it," Derek whispered, his voice tight with panic. "The guy said it was a sure thing." "Keep your voice down," Nicole hissed back, not even looking at him. "How much, Derek? How much exactly?" Derek took a long swig of his beer. 200 large. And the VIG is running up every week. If I do not pay by the 1st of the month, they are going to start breaking things. And I do not mean furniture. $200,000. My blood ran cold. I stared at my plate, forcing my hand to remain steady. My son-in-law had gambled away a fortune, and now I knew exactly why they needed to liquidate my assets so quickly. They were not trying to pay for Beatrice's care. They were trying to save Derek's kneecaps. They were going to sell the home I built with my own hands to pay off a bookie. We will have the money. Nicole whispered, her voice cold and devoid of affection. Once the power of attorney is signed on Friday, I can list the house immediately. I already have a cash buyer lined up. We just need to keep them quiet until then. Them meant us, me and Beatrice. We were just inventory to be managed until the sale went through. Magda stepped forward from the shadows. "It is time for the evening dose," she announced. Her voice was like gravel in a blender. She placed a small paper cup on the table in front of Beatrice. I watched closely. For 3 years, Beatrice had taken a small white pill in the evening, a mild sedative to help her sleep. I knew the shape. I knew the size. The pill in the cup was not white. It was blue. A bright electric blue that looked unnatural against the white paper. I leaned forward, squinting through my glasses. "What is that?" I asked, pointing a shaking finger at the cup. "That is not her usual medicine. The white one is the evening one." Nicole sighed, dropping her fork onto her plate with a loud clatter. "Dad, we went over this. Dr. Thorne changed her regimen. Remember, you were there. I was there, but he didn't prescribe this. He prescribed a vitamin placebo to save her life. This blue pill was the poison. This was the haloperidol. It looks different," I mumbled, playing the part. "Is it a generic? It is a new cognitive supplement." Nicole lied smoothly. "It costs $500 a bottle, so do not let her spit it out. It helps with the neuroregeneration." Neuroregeneration. She used big words to hide her big crimes. I watched Magda pick up the pill. She didn't offer Beatrice a glass of water first. She just reached out and pinched Beatrice's cheeks, forcing her mouth open like she was dosing a stubborn dog. "Open up." Magda grunted. Beatrice whimpered. She tried to turn her head away. Her survival instinct was fighting through the fog. She knew deep down that this was wrong. "No," Beatrice moaned softly. "No. Blue." "Just take it," Mother Nicole snapped. "Stop making everything so difficult." Magda shoved the pill into Beatrice's mouth and clamped a hand over her lips to force her to swallow. I felt a surge of violence rise in my chest, so strong I almost blacked out. I wanted to grab the steak knife and drive it into the table, but I couldn't. Not yet. If I fought Magda, she would break me in half. I needed that pill. I needed physical evidence. Beatrice gagged. She coughed, her body convulsing slightly. Magda pulled her hand away, satisfied that the deed was done, and turned to grab the water glass. In that split second, Beatrice leaned forward and hacked. The blue pill flew out of her mouth and landed on her napkin, wet and dissolving slightly, but intact. Magda spun around. "Damn it," she growled, reaching for the pill. This was my chance. I didn't think, I just acted. "Oops," I cried out, and with a spasm of my arm I swept my own spoon off the table. It hit the floor with a loud metallic ring that echoed in the silent room. I immediately threw myself forward, diving under the table as if to retrieve it. "I am sorry. I am sorry." "Clumsy old hands," I muttered. Beneath the tablecloth it was a different world. I saw Magda's thick legs, I saw Derek's nervous feet, and I saw Beatrice's hand dangling down the napkin, slipping from her lap. The blue pill fell, bouncing silently onto the rug right in front of my face. "Dad, get up," Nicole yelled from above. "Magda will get it." I snatched the blue pill off the rug and shoved it deep into my sock. In the same motion, I grabbed my spoon. I stayed down there for a second longer, breathing hard, my heart hammering against the floorboards. I had the weapon. I had the proof. I pulled myself up, gripping the edge of the table, my face flushed. I got it. I wheezed, holding up the spoon. I got it. Magda was glaring at Beatrice. She wasted $500, she accused, looking at the empty napkin. She swallowed it. I lied, my voice trembling. I saw her swallow it before she coughed. That was just spit. Nicole looked at me, then at Beatrice. Beatrice looked pale, exhausted, but she wasn't choking. Fine, Nicole said, waving her hand dismissively. Just take her to bed. I cannot deal with this mess right now. Derek, come to the garage. We need to talk about the spread. Magda wheeled Beatrice away without a word. I sat alone at the dining table, the greasy smell of cold stir-fry making me nauseous. But I felt a hard lump against my ankle inside my sock. It was the most dangerous thing in the house, and it was mine. The night dragged on. I lay in my bed, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. I had locked my door, though I knew the lock was flimsy. The house was full of creaks and groans, sounds that used to comfort me, but now sounded like threats. I checked my watch. 2 a.m. The house was silent. Nicole and Derek had gone to their room on the other side of the house hours ago. Magda slept in the guest room downstairs. I needed to see her. I needed to know she was okay. I slipped out of bed, my socks sliding silently on the hardwood floor. I knew exactly which floorboards squeaked, the third one from the door, the one near the linen closet, and I stepped over them with the grace of a cat burglar. I reached Beatrice's door. It was closed. I turned the handle slowly, praying it wasn't locked. It turned. Magda was arrogant. She didn't think a vegetable needed locking in. I slipped inside. The room was dark, illuminated only by a sliver of moonlight cutting through the curtains. The air smelled stale, like sickness and neglect. Beatrice was a lump under the heavy quilt. I crept to the side of the bed and knelt down. "Beatrice," I whispered. "Bay." She didn't move at first. I reached out and touched her cheek. It was burning hot. The fake vitamin was doing something to her system, or maybe it was the withdrawal from the real medicine she needed. Her eyelids fluttered. Slowly, painfully, she opened them. In the darkness, her eyes tried to focus. Usually she looked through me, seeing ghosts of the past. But tonight, for a fleeting second, the fog lifted. Maybe it was because she had spit out the poison at dinner. Maybe the toxicity levels had dropped just enough for my wife to surface. "Harold." The voice was barely a breath, cracked and dry. But it was her voice. Not the confused mumble of a patient, but the voice of the woman who had stood by my side for half a century. "I am here, B." I choked out, gripping her hand. "I am right here." She gripped my hand back. Her strength was feeble, but the intention was there. She pulled me closer. "Harold," she rasped. "The water." I reached for the glass on the nightstand. "Here, drink." She shook her head, a tiny frantic movement. "No, not that water. The water she gave me earlier." She looked at me, her eyes wide with a terrifying clarity. "It tastes bitter, Harold. It tastes like metal. Why does she make me drink the bitter water?" My heart broke into 1,000 shards. She knew. Somewhere deep inside the chemical haze they had forced upon her, she knew she was being harmed. I leaned in, brushing the hair from her sweating forehead. "Listen to me, B. You have to be strong. Do not drink the water if you can help it. Spit out the pills." "Can you do that for me?" She closed her eyes, a tear leaking out and tracking through the wrinkles on her cheek. "She hurts me, Harold," she whispered, her voice fading as the exhaustion took over again. She twists my arms. "Save me, please. Do not let me disappear." I kissed her forehead, tasting the salt of her sweat and my own tears. I will save you, I promised into the darkness. I swear on my life, Beatrice. I am going to burn their world down to get you out. Her breathing evened out as she slipped back into the dark sleep that wasn't really sleep. I stayed there for a moment longer, listening to the rhythm of her lungs fueling my rage with every rattle in her chest. I had the pill in my sock. I had the confirmation from her own lips. The investigation was over. It was time for the counterattack. I stood up, wiped my eyes, and walked out of the room. The old man who entered that room was gone. The engineer had returned, and he was ready to demolish the enemy. The morning sun dragged itself through the curtains of the master bedroom, but it brought no warmth to the house. I woke up with a stiff neck and a plan. The events of the previous night, the blue pill in my sock, and the terrifying clarity of Beatrice's plea were not a nightmare. They were my new reality. I lay there for a moment, listening to the house wake up. I heard the heavy thud of Magda's footsteps in the hallway and the sharp clinking of ceramic from the kitchen where Nicole was making her espresso. They were moving with the confidence of owners. They thought the war was already won. They thought they were just waiting for the surrender papers to be signed. I sat up and swung my legs over the side of the bed. My knees cracked, a sound that used to annoy me but now served as part of my disguise. Today I had to be more than just old. I had to be broken. I had to be the confused, stumbling relic they believed I was. If I showed even a flicker of the sharp, calculating engineer who had once overseen the construction of the Hancock scaffolding, they would lock me away before I could make my move. I practiced my tremors. I let my jaw go slack. I hunched my shoulders forward, shrinking my 6-foot frame into something smaller, something harmless. I shuffled into the kitchen, dragging my feet on the hardwood. Nicole was standing at the island, scrolling through her tablet, a steaming mug of coffee in front of her. She didn't look up when I entered. To her, I was just background noise like the hum of the refrigerator. "Good morning," I mumbled, slurring my words slightly. Is there any coffee?" "There is a pot on the counter, Dad," she said, her voice flat. "Help yourself. Just try not to spill it this time." I moved to the coffee maker, making a show of having trouble with the carafe. I let my hand shake violently as I poured splashing hot liquid onto the pristine granite countertop. "Damn it," I whispered, staring at the mess. Clumsy. Useless. Nicole sighed, a sound of pure exhaustion. She put down her tablet and grabbed a paper towel. "Move, Dad. Just sit down. I will do it." She wiped up the spill with aggressive swipes. I watched her, memorizing the contempt in her eyes. It was fuel. Every eye roll, every heavy sigh was another beam of steel reinforcing my resolve. I took the mug she thrust at me and sat at the dining table, positioning myself within striking distance of where she was standing. This was it. The first test of my counter-offensive. I reached up to my left ear and fiddled with my hearing aid. It was a high-end model Bluetooth enabled with a synchronized receiver. I deliberately pressed the casing to create a feedback loop. A high-pitched, piercing squeal erupted from the device, cutting through the quiet kitchen like a dentist's drill. Nicole winced and covered her ears. "God! Dad, turn that thing down. It is splitting my head open." I flinched, acting startled by the noise. I can't stop it." I stammered frantically, pawing at my ear. "It is broken. It is making the noise again." "Take it out, then," she yelled. I pulled the device from my ear, fumbling with it, until the squealing stopped. I stared at the small piece of plastic in my palm, looking bewildered. "It is the battery," I muttered. "Or the moisture. I need to find the cleaning kit." I placed the hearing aid on the kitchen island right next to Nicole's fruit bowl and her phone. I left it there, sitting innocently on a napkin. "I am going to the bathroom," I said, standing up slowly. I think the kit is under the sink. Just go! Nicole waved her hand, returning to her tablet. I shuffled away, moving toward the hallway that led to the guest bathroom. But I didn't go to the bathroom. I stopped just around the corner out of her line of sight, but close enough to the kitchen entrance. Here was the trick. They thought I was deaf without my aids. They didn't know how these devices worked. The two earpieces were paired. They communicated with each other. Before I took the left one out, I had discreetly tapped the control on my right earpiece, the one still hidden under my hair, and switched it to live listen mode. It was a feature designed to help hear conversations in noisy restaurants by turning one hearing aid into a remote microphone. I had cranked the sensitivity to maximum. I stood in the shadows of the hallway, pressing my back against the wall. Static hissed in my right ear, followed by the amplified sound of a spoon hitting a ceramic mug. It was so loud it made me wince. Then I heard the rustle of fabric. Nicole was moving. I heard the distinct sound of a phone dialing. Then Nicole's voice came through crystal clear, as if she were whispering directly into my brain. David. It is me. I held my breath. David was the lawyer. Not our family lawyer, but the shark she had hired. Yes, I am at the house, she said. The old man is wandering around looking for his brain cells. He is completely out of it. I just had to clean up his mess in the kitchen. I clenched my fists. The insults didn't hurt anymore. What hurt was the betrayal. Listen, we need to move the timeline up, she continued, her voice dropping lower. I do not want to wait until next week. My husband is getting antsy about the loans. What about Judge Kincaid? I froze. Kincaid. I knew that name. He was a local judge known for fast-tracking probate cases, and rumors had swirled for years about his gambling debts. There was a pause as she listened to the person on the other end. Good, she said. I transferred the consultation fee to his offshore account this morning. $20,000, just like you said. So he is on board. My stomach dropped. A bribe. They weren't just manipulating the system. They were buying it. $20,000 of my money, likely stolen from the safe used to buy the gavel that would crush me. Friday, she asked. Yes. Friday works. Here at the house. We will claim hardship. My mother is bedridden, and my father is too senile to travel. Kincaid can sign the emergency conservatorship order right here in the living room. Friday. Today was Wednesday. I had less than 48 hours. And David, she added, her tone turning icy. Make sure Kincaid knows that once I have the signature, the house goes on the market Monday morning. I have a cash buyer from overseas who does not care about inspections. I want this property liquidated before anyone starts asking questions about the trust fund. She laughed then. A short, sharp sound. Don't worry. Dad doesn't have a clue. He thinks his hearing aid is broken. He is practically a vegetable. I closed my eyes. A vegetable. That is what she saw. A rotting piece of produce to be discarded. But she forgot that roots grow deep in the dark. Okay, bye. I heard the phone beep as she ended the call. I waited a full minute, counting the seconds in my head, forcing my heart rate to slow down. If I went back in there looking agitated, she would know. I had to go back in there looking defeated. I shuffled back into the kitchen. Nicole was sipping her coffee, looking relaxed, victorious. I couldn't find the kit. I mumbled, looking at the floor. It is probably in the cabinet, Dad, she said, not even looking up. Just leave it. Magda can fix it later. I walked over to the island and picked up my hearing aid. I held the little device in my hand. It felt heavy, loaded with the weight of the evidence I had just gathered. I will just sit in the living room, I said. I put the hearing aid back in my ear, turning the mode back to normal. The feedback squeal returned for a second, masking the sound of my sharp intake of breath. Friday, I thought. The execution date was set. I walked to the living room and sat in my armchair. From here I could see the structure of my house. The load-bearing walls, the beams, the foundation. Nicole thought she was selling a building. She didn't realize she was standing inside a machine that I had designed. And now that I knew her schedule, I knew exactly when to pull the lever to bring it all down. I needed to get to the basement. I needed my laptop, and I needed to reach Dr. Thorne. But I couldn't just walk out the door. The digital lock was still a mystery, and Magda was prowling the halls. I looked at the hearing aid in my hand again. It was a receiver, a transmitter, a tool. And like any good engineer, I knew that if you couldn't break a system from the outside, you had to introduce a virus from the inside. Nicole walked past the living room, heading toward the stairs. "I am going to shower," she called out. "Do not burn the house down while I am gone." I watched her ascend the stairs. "I won't burn it down," I whispered to the empty room. "I am going to dismantle it, piece by piece." I waited until I heard the shower running upstairs. Then I stood up. The tremor in my legs vanished. I moved with purpose toward the kitchen drawer where I knew we kept the spare batteries. But I wasn't looking for batteries. I was looking for a magnet. A strong industrial magnet I used to keep for finding studs in the wall. I found it at the back of the junk drawer, stuck to a screwdriver. I pocketed it. Then I moved to the keypad on the back door. It was a cheaper model than the front door. I knew its wiring diagram by heart. I didn't need a code. I needed physics. I held the magnet against the side of the lock mechanism, feeling for the solenoid. Click. The internal latch shifted. It wasn't fully open, but it was compromised. I didn't open the door yet. That would trigger the alarm. But I had prepped the exit. My mind was racing, calculating variables. Friday at noon. Judge Kincaid, the lawyer, Nicole, Derek. They would all be in one room. It was the perfect bottleneck. I sat back down in my chair just as the shower stopped upstairs. I put on my glasses and picked up a 3-day-old newspaper, holding it upside down. Let them think I am senile. Let them think I am reading yesterday's news. By the time they realize I am writing tomorrow's headlines, it will be too late. The engineer was online, and the demolition countdown had begun. I sat in the living room for another hour, listening to the silence of the house. Nicole had left 20 minutes ago, the tires of her SUV crunching on the gravel driveway as she sped off to meet with her lawyer and bribe a judge. That left me with Magda. I peeked into the hallway. The nurse was sitting in the armchair outside Beatrice's room, her head lolling back, mouth open, emitting a low, rhythmic snore. She was confident in her control. She thought the prisoners were subdued. She was wrong. I stood up, moving with the silent precision I had learned not in the army, but on construction sites where one wrong step could send a beam crashing down. I bypassed the kitchen and headed straight for the narrow door under the stairs. It was painted the same color as the wall, almost invisible if you didn't know it was there. This was the entrance to my basement, my workshop, my kingdom. Nicole hated it down there. She called it a dungeon. She complained about the smell of sawdust and oil. She was terrified of spiders. It was the only place in the house where her influence did not reach. I opened the door and slipped inside, closing it softly behind me. The air was cool and smelled of cedar and old metal. I descended the wooden steps, each one familiar under my feet. I didn't turn on the main lights. I didn't want the sudden surge in electricity to be noticed on the smart meter. Nicole probably monitored. Instead, I clicked on the small LED lamp on my workbench. The basement was exactly as I had left it. My tools hung on the pegboard in neat rows. My soldering iron, my voltage meters, my collection of rare circuit boards. This was where I fixed things. This was where I made sense of the world. And today I was going to use it to fix the biggest problem of my life. I walked over to a heavy, dust-covered toolbox in the corner. I wiped the top with my sleeve and popped the latches. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, was my old field laptop. It was a Panasonic Toughbook, a beast of a machine designed for military and industrial use. It was thick, heavy, and ugly, but it was virtually indestructible. And more importantly, it was completely offline. Nicole didn't even know it existed. She thought computing meant sleek tablets and touchscreens. She didn't understand the power of hardware that could survive a drop from a 3-story building. I pulled it up onto the workbench and pressed the power button. The screen flickered to life with a dull green glow, the cooling fan whirring like a jet engine for a second, before settling into a steady hum. I didn't dare connect to the house Wi-Fi. Nicole's husband Derek might be a gambling addict, but he was tech-savvy enough to set up network alerts. If a new device pinged the router, they would know. I reached into a small drawer under the bench and pulled out a black USB dongle. It was a prepaid 4G modem I kept for emergencies when storm damage knocked out the cable lines. I plugged it in. The little light blinked red, then amber, then a solid, steady green. I was online. Ghost mode. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the blue pill. It looked innocuous in the dim light. Just a small oval tablet. But I knew it was a bullet aimed at my wife's heart. I squinted at the markings. They were tiny, almost worn off, but under the magnifying glass of my helping hands tool, they were clear enough. H5. I typed the alphanumeric code into a pharmaceutical identification database. My fingers flew across the chunky keys. Enter. The search results loaded instantly. The first line hit me like a physical blow. Haloperidol, 5 milligrams. I clicked the link, my eyes scanning the text, rapidly absorbing the data with the detached efficiency of an engineer analyzing a stress fracture. Class, first-generation antipsychotic. Indications, schizophrenia, acute psychosis, Tourette syndrome. Contraindications, dementia-related psychosis. I froze. I read that line again. Contraindications, dementia-related psychosis. I scrolled down to the warnings section. It was in bold red text. Warning: increased mortality in elderly patients with dementia-related psychosis. Not approved for the treatment of patients with dementia-related psychosis. Increased mortality. That was a polite medical way of saying it killed them. I read on. Side effects: muscle rigidity, tremors, shuffling gait, cognitive decline, difficulty speaking, mask-like facial expression. I sat back, the breath leaving my lungs in a rush. It wasn't just poison. It was a perfect disguise. The drug created the exact symptoms of advanced Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. The rigidity, the tremors, the blank stare. Everything we thought was the disease progressing was actually the drug taking hold. They were not just sedating her. They were manufacturing a decline so convincing that no judge would question the need for a conservatorship. And the dosage. 5 milligrams. For a woman of Beatrice's weight and age, the recommended starting dose for acute agitation, if it was used at all, was 0.5 milligrams. They were giving her 10 times the safe limit. This wasn't care. This was an execution in slow motion. My hands shook, but this time it wasn't an act. It was pure, unadulterated rage. I wanted to run upstairs and shake Magda until her teeth rattled. I wanted to force that blue pill down Nicole's throat and see how she liked being trapped in her own body. But I couldn't. Not yet. I needed to document this. I needed undeniable proof. I grabbed a small digital camera from my shelf and took a macro photo of the pill next to the screen showing the drug information. I took a photo of the search results. I saved everything to an encrypted folder on the desktop. Then I pulled up the property records for our address. I needed to see if they had already made a move on the title. The county clerk's website was slow, but it finally loaded. I searched for Harold and Beatrice Foster. Status active. Liens pending. Pending. I clicked for details. A lien had been filed 2 days ago, a creditor claim against the property. The name on the filing was a holding company I didn't recognize, but the address was a P.O. box in Nevada. I quickly searched the company name. It led to a shell corporation associated with high-risk lending. Loan sharks. Derek hadn't just gambled away his own money. He had borrowed against my house, likely forging my signature on a promissory note. And now the sharks were circling. That was why they needed to sell on Monday. If they didn't pay up, the lien would turn into a foreclosure, and their entire scheme would be exposed. They were desperate, and desperate people were dangerous. Suddenly a heavy thud echoed from above. Then another. The stairs creaked. Someone was coming down. I slammed the laptop shut. The green glow vanished. I yanked the USB modem out and shoved it into my pocket along with the pill. I grabbed the first thing I saw on the shelf, a dusty photo album from the 80s, and threw it open on the workbench. The door at the top of the stairs flew open. Light from the hallway spilled down, cutting through the shadows. "Hey!" a voice boomed. It was Derek. He stomped down the stairs, his heavy boots shaking the wooden treads. He was wearing a tracksuit and smelled of stale cigarette smoke. He stopped halfway down, peering into the gloom. "Old man, what the hell are you doing down here?" I hunched over the album, my finger tracing a random photo. I didn't look up immediately. I let him come to me. I was looking for the pictures. I said, my voice trembling. The ones from the trip to the Grand Canyon. Derek reached the bottom of the stairs and walked over to the bench. He looked at the toolbox. He looked at the laptop. My heart stopped. If he touched it, if he felt the heat coming from the cooling vents, I was dead. He sneered, looking down at the open album. "That is not the Grand Canyon, you old bat. That is a picture of a barbecue in the backyard." I squinted at the photo. It looks like red rocks." "It is a brick wall," Derek spat. "Jesus. Nicole was right. You are losing it completely." He looked around the basement, his eyes darting to the corners. "You are not supposed to be down here. It is dangerous. There are sharp tools. You could fall and break a hip, and then we would have to deal with that mess too." "I just wanted to remember," I whispered. "Well, remember upstairs," he said, grabbing my arm. His grip was tight, painful. "Come on, Magda is looking for you. It is almost time for your lunch." He pulled me toward the stairs. I stumbled, clutching the photo album to my chest like a shield. I let him drag me away from the workbench, away from the evidence that could send him to prison for 20 years. "Wait," I said, resisting slightly. My book." I reached back and grabbed a random manual off the bench, knocking a wrench onto the floor with a loud clang. "Leave it!" Derek yelled. "God, you are useless!" He shoved me up the stairs. I climbed slowly, one step at a time, listening to his heavy breathing behind me. He was angry. He was stressed. He was careless. He hadn't checked the laptop. He hadn't noticed the missing magnet. He hadn't seen the fire in my eyes. We emerged into the hallway. The bright light hurt my eyes after the darkness of the basement. Magda was standing there, looking annoyed. "I found him," Derek said, pushing me toward her. "He was playing in the basement." "Lock the door, Magda, and take the key." Magda nodded, pulling a ring of keys from her pocket. She locked the basement door and slipped the key into her scrub top. "No more wandering, Mr. Foster," she said, her voice like a closing cell door. "Sit, eat, sleep." She pointed to the living room. I walked over to my chair and sat down. I placed the photo album on my lap. My hands were shaking, but this time it was from adrenaline. I had the diagnosis. I had the motive. I knew the enemy's timeline. Friday, noon. I looked at the digital clock on the VCR. It was Wednesday, 2 p.m. 46 hours. I opened the photo album and pretended to look at the pictures of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. But under the cover of the heavy cardboard pages, I was already drawing the blueprints for the trap. They had locked the basement, but they had forgotten one thing. I had built this house, and I knew that the ventilation shaft in the basement ran directly behind the wall of the master bedroom where Nicole and Derek slept. I didn't need to go back down there to hurt them. I just needed to wait for nightfall, and I needed to retrieve the little surprise I had left in the air duct 10 years ago, a maintenance hatch that opened from the guest bathroom. I closed the album. The old man was tired, but the engineer was just getting started. Derek hauled me up the final step of the basement stairs and shoved me into the hallway with enough force that I stumbled and nearly fell against the wainscoting. My shoulder slammed into the plaster, sending a jolt of pain down my arm, but I kept my grip on the old photo album I had grabbed as a prop. It was my only shield. I wheezed, straightening my back slowly, playing up the frailty, letting my breath hitch in my throat like a dying engine. Derek locked the basement door behind us and pocketed the key, his chest heaving from the exertion of dragging an old man up a flight of stairs. He looked sweaty and guilty, the look of a man who knows he is doing wrong, but is too deep in the hole to stop digging. Just then, the front door beeped. The electronic lock disengaged, and Nicole swept into the foyer. She stopped dead when she saw us. She was wearing her power suit, a sharp navy blazer that cost more than my first car, but her face was tight with stress. She dropped her briefcase on the floor and marched toward us, her eyes scanning the scene with the predatory focus of a hawk spotting a mouse in the grass. Her gaze landed instantly on my hands. I looked down. In my haste to hide the laptop, I had smeared gray dust from the workbench all over my fingers and the cuffs of my shirt. It was the specific dark gray dust of galvanized steel and old oil unmistakably from the workshop. "You let him go down there," Nicole said, her voice quiet and dangerous. Derek held up his hands, stepping back. "I just went to the bathroom for 2 minutes, Nick. He must have snuck past me. I caught him right away. He was just looking at old photos." Nicole didn't look at me. She looked at her husband. She closed the distance between them in 2 strides and swung her hand. The slap echoed through the hallway like a pistol crack. It wasn't a theatrical slap. It was vicious. It was the release of weeks of panic and pressure. Derek grabbed his cheek, his eyes wide with shock and humiliation. "You had one job," she hissed, pointing a manicured finger in his face. "One job. Watch the old man. If he falls down those stairs and breaks his neck before Friday, the coroner gets involved. If the coroner gets involved, there is an autopsy. Do you want an autopsy, Derek? Do you want them looking at what is in his blood?" Derek stammered, looking at the floor, shamed in front of the father-in-law he was trying to rob. I didn't think." "Exactly, you didn't think," Nicole snapped. She finally turned her cold gaze on me. She grabbed my wrist, ignoring my flinch, and inspected the dust on my fingers. She looked at the photo album clutched to my chest. Then she looked into my eyes. For a second, I thought she saw me. I thought she saw the engineer behind the mask. But she just saw resistance. She saw an obstacle. "You want to walk down memory lane, Dad?" she asked, her voice dripping with mock sweetness that was far more terrifying than her anger. "You want to look at pictures of the house you built?" I nodded slowly, keeping my mouth open slightly, maintaining the ruse. I just wanted to see the workbench." "Well, take a good look," she said, releasing my wrist with a shove, "because you are not going to see it much longer." She walked past me into the living room, kicking off her heels. She gestured for us to follow. It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. "Sit down," she commanded. I sat in my armchair. Derek slumped onto the sofa, nursing his red cheek. Nicole began to pace in front of the fireplace, the very fireplace I had laid brick by brick during the winter of '82. "Since you are so fond of this house, Dad, I think it is time you knew the truth. You are confused, so I will use small words. She stopped and looked at the high vaulted ceiling. I have a buyer, a cash buyer from Dubai. He does not care about the memories. He does not care about the garden Mom planted. He wants the land. He is offering $1.5 million for the property as a teardown. My heart seized. A teardown. They were going to bulldoze it. 40 years of life, the height marks on the doorframe, the custom shelving, the foundation, I poured with my own sweat, gone in an afternoon. 1.5, Derek muttered from the couch, perking up slightly. That covers the everything and leaves plenty over. Nicole nodded. Exactly. But here is the math problem, Dad. We cannot have you two living here when the bulldozers come. So I have found a lovely place for you and Mom. She pulled a glossy brochure from her pocket and tossed it into my lap. It slid across the photo album. The cover showed a generic stock photo of smiling seniors playing checkers. The name of the facility was Sunset Haven. I knew this place. It was 2 counties over. It was a converted motel that had been cited by the state health department 3 times in the last 5 years for bed sores and malnutrition. It was where people went to be forgotten. It is very affordable, Nicole said, a cruel smile playing on her lips. $2,000 a month for a double room. That is a steal. I did the math instantly. $1.5 million from the house. Our pension and Social Security brought in $4,000 a month. The nursing home cost $2,000. That meant Nicole and Derek would be pocketing the entire sale price of the house, plus skimming $2,000 a month from our government checks. They weren't just stealing our home. They were turning us into a revenue stream. They were farming us. I looked up at her, letting a tear leak from my eye. It wasn't hard. The grief was real, but... Mom loves the garden, I whispered. Mom doesn't know what day it is, Nicole shouted, her composure cracking again. Stop pretending this matters. You are both checking out. You are empty shells. I am doing you a favor by managing the decline. She leaned in close, her perfume overpowering the smell of dust on my clothes. You are going to that hearing on Friday. You are going to nod at Judge Kincaid. You are going to let me save this family from the financial ruin that you are too senile to understand. And then you are going to Sunset Haven, and you can look at that photo album until you rot. The cruelty was breathtaking. It was absolute. She had dehumanized us completely to justify her greed. I gripped the armrests of my chair, my knuckles turning white. I wanted to drop the act. I wanted to tell her about the recording device in the kitchen. I wanted to tell her about the blue pill in my pocket. I wanted to tell her that her teardown was about to collapse on her head. But before I could speak, a sound tore through the house. It was a guttural, wet, choking noise coming from the hallway. We all froze. Then came the sound of something heavy hitting the floor and the frantic rattling of the wheelchair. Magda screamed. Not a scream of fear, but of annoyance. Hold her, she is biting her tongue. Beatrice, I moved faster than I had in 20 years. I didn't think about my limp. I didn't think about the ruse. I launched myself out of the chair and sprinted toward the hallway. Dad, wait! Nicole yelled behind me. I rounded the corner and saw the nightmare. Beatrice had convulsed out of her wheelchair. She was on the floor, her body arching in a violent, unnatural spasm. Her eyes were rolled back into her head, showing only the whites. Foam tinged with pink blood was bubbling at the corner of her mouth. Magda was standing over her, trying to pin her arms down, but she was being rough, slapping Beatrice's face to wake her up. Stop, I roared. Do not touch her. I dropped to my knees beside my wife. My engineering brain switched to emergency mode. This wasn't a seizure. This was a toxicity spike. Her nervous system was misfiring because of the overdose. I needed to clear her airway. I needed to get her on her side. Let me help her, I shouted, reaching for Beatrice's shoulders to turn her into the recovery position. Magda looked up. Her face was flushed, her eyes wild. She didn't see a husband saving his wife. She saw an interference. She saw a witness. "Get back, old man," Magda barked. She didn't just block me. She stood up and swung her forearm like a club. It was a move born of frustration and brute strength. Her arm connected with my chest, right where the sternum meets the collarbone. The force was immense. I was 71 years old. My bones were not what they used to be. I flew backward. My feet lost traction on the polished floor. I slammed into the wall, the back of my head connecting with the plaster with a sickening crack. Lights exploded behind my eyes. The world tilted sideways. I slid down the wall, stunning pain radiating from my skull down to my neck. I tried to stand up, but my legs felt like water. I reached up to my forehead and felt a warm, sticky liquid trickling down into my left eye. Blood. Through the red haze of my vision, I saw Nicole and Derek running into the hallway. "Oh my God," Nicole screamed. "Magda, what did you do?" "He was interfering," Magda yelled, still pinning Beatrice to the floor. "She is seizing." "He tried to move her. Call 911, I croaked, trying to crawl toward my wife. "Call the ambulance." "No," Nicole shouted. "No ambulance." She turned to Derek. "Help Magda get Mom back in the chair. Get the emergency sedative kit. The injection." Now Derek scrambled into the bedroom. "No. No more drugs," I slurred, fighting the darkness that was creeping in at the edges of my vision. "You are killing her." Nicole knelt in front of me. She didn't check my head wound. She didn't check my pulse. She grabbed my face, her nails digging into my cheeks, forcing me to look at her. "Listen to me, Dad," she hissed, her face inches from mine. "Mom is fine. She just got excited. You fell down. You slipped on the rug. Do you hear me? You fell." I looked past her. I saw Derek plunging a needle into Beatrice's arm. I saw my wife's body go limp, the convulsions stopping, not because she was better, but because her system had been forcibly shut down. "You monster," I whispered. Nicole stood up, wiping my blood off her hands onto her skirt. "Take him to his room," she told Magda. "Lock him in. If he bleeds on the carpet, you are paying for the cleaning." Magda grabbed me by the back of my shirt and hauled me up. The room spun violently. I couldn't fight. I was dizzy, nauseous, and bleeding. She dragged me down the hall, my feet trailing uselessly behind me. She threw me onto my bed and slammed the door. I heard the lock click, then the sound of a chair being wedged under the handle from the outside. I lay in the darkness, the copper taste of blood in my mouth. My head throbbed in time with my heartbeat. I touched the wound on my forehead. It was deep. I needed stitches, but I wasn't going to get them. I rolled onto my side, staring at the window. The sun was setting, casting long, bloody shadows across the floor. They thought they had won. They thought they had beaten me into submission. I closed my eyes, listening to the silence of the house. Beatrice was quiet now. Too quiet. But as the pain in my head sharpened, so did my resolve. They had made a fatal mistake. They had resorted to violence. They had drawn blood. The war was no longer cold. It was hot. And as I lay there waiting for the cover of night, I realized that the blow to my head hadn't knocked the fight out of me. It had knocked the hesitation out. I wasn't going to wait for the law. I wasn't going to wait for Friday. Tonight, the engineer is going to dismantle the machine, even if I had to use my own broken bones as the wrench. I slowly pulled my legs up, testing my strength. I could move. I could stand. And most importantly, I remembered the ventilation shaft. I remembered the path. The bleeding had to stop. The work had to begin. The silence in my bedroom was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic throbbing in my temples, where my head had met the plaster wall. I sat on the edge of the bed, pressing a wad of tissues against the cut on my forehead. The bleeding had slowed to a sluggish ooze, but the rage inside me was flowing faster than ever. I looked at the digital clock on the nightstand. It was 2 in the morning. The house was asleep. Magda was likely snoring in the guest room, and Nicole and Derek were upstairs probably dreaming of the money they would spend once they buried us. They had locked the door from the outside, wedging a chair under the handle. A crude, effective prison for a 71-year-old man. But they had forgotten who they were dealing with. They saw a geriatric patient. They forgot they were dealing with the man who had personally retrofitted the drainage system of this house after the flood of '96. I moved to the bathroom attached to the master suite. It was a small mercy that I had an ensuite, or I would have been forced to break the door down hours ago. I locked the bathroom door behind me and turned on the tap to mask any noise. I opened the window. It was a double-hung sash window, heavy and stiff with age. I pushed it up slowly, millimeter by millimeter, wincing as my bruised shoulder protested. The cold Chicago night air hit me like a bucket of ice water, shocking my system awake. I looked down. It was a 15-foot drop to the concrete patio below. A fall would mean a broken hip, and a broken hip meant Sunset Haven and a slow death. But I wasn't going to jump. I looked to the left. Running along the brick facade was the main drainage pipe for the gutters. When I installed it 30 years ago, I didn't use the cheap aluminum brackets the contractor recommended. I used industrial steel anchors drilled 3 inches deep into the brick. I knew exactly how much weight that pipe could hold. It was rated for 200 pounds of sheer force. I weighed 165. It was a calculated risk, the kind I had made 1,000 times on job sites, but never with stakes this high. I grabbed a towel from the rack and wrapped it around my hands to improve my grip and protect my skin from the freezing metal. I climbed onto the toilet seat, then swung my leg over the windowsill. The wind bit through my thin pajamas. I took a deep breath, muttered a silent prayer to whatever God looks after foolish old men, and reached for the pipe. My fingers closed around the cold PVC. It held. I shifted my weight, swinging my body out into the void. For a terrifying second, I dangled there, suspended between the life I built and the abyss. My shoulder screamed in agony, but I grit my teeth and clamped my legs around the pipe. I began to slide down. It wasn't graceful. It was a desperate, scraping descent. My knees banged against the brick. My pajamas tore. But I controlled the slide, using the friction to slow my momentum until my feet touched the frozen grass of the backyard. I let go and collapsed for a second, gasping for air, waiting for the lights in the house to flip on. Nothing. The house remained dark. The fortress had a breach, and the prisoner was out. I didn't waste time. I stayed in the shadows of the hedges, moving toward the back gate. I couldn't take the car. They had the keys. I couldn't call a taxi. I had no phone. I had to run. There was a gas station 2 miles down the road near the highway on-ramp. It was an artifact from another era, and I prayed it still had the payphone I remembered seeing years ago. I started to jog. My lungs burned like dry paper. My knees ached with every impact. But I forced myself into a rhythm. Left foot, right foot. Breathe. This wasn't exercise. This was a rescue mission. The suburban streets were empty, lit only by the orange glow of street lamps. I looked like a madman, an old man in torn pajamas running through the night, with blood dried on his face. Cars passed me occasionally, and I ducked into the shadows, terrified that a police cruiser might stop me. If the cops picked me up, they would run my ID, call Nicole, and she would spin her story about her dementia-ridden father wandering off. They would deliver me right back to the slaughterhouse. I kept my head down and ran until I tasted copper in my throat. The gas station appeared like a beacon in the darkness, neon lights buzzing, a bored attendant sleeping behind the glass. And there on the side of the building was the payphone. It was battered, covered in graffiti, but the receiver was still attached. I fumbled in my pocket for the loose change I always carried. A habit Nicole called hoarding, but I called preparation. I dropped 3 quarters into the slot. The dial tone was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. I dialed Dr. Thorne's emergency number. It was printed on this prescription slip he had given me, the one I had memorized before Magda took it away. It rang once, twice, 3 times. "Pick up," I whispered. "Please pick up." "Hello." A voice answered, groggy and confused. "Dr. Thorne," I rasped, leaning my forehead against the cold metal of the phone box. "It is Harold Foster. Do not hang up, Harold." The voice sharpened instantly. "Where are you? Are you safe? I am at a payphone." "I escaped. Listen to me, we do not have much time. They are moving the hearing to Friday. They have bought a judge." "Kincaid." Thorne swore softly. "Kincaid. That man is a crook in robes. Harold, you cannot go back there. I will call the police right now. I will send them to the house." "No," I shouted, then lowered my voice, looking around. "No police. Not yet. If the police come now, Nicole will show them the power of attorney. She will show them Beatrice in a drug-induced stupor. She will say, 'I am violent.' They have already set it up, doctor. Magda attacked me, but they are saying I fell. If the police come, they will see a crazy old man and a dutiful daughter. We lose." "Then what do we do?" Thorne asked, sounding desperate. "I need a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. I need a shark. Someone who hates Nicole. Someone who knows where the bodies are buried in this town." There was a pause. I could hear Thorne thinking. "Sarah Jenkins," he said. "She used to work with Nicole's firm before she went into elder law. She despises your daughter. Apparently Nicole stole a client list from her 5 years ago. Sarah has been waiting for a chance to nail her. Call her," I commanded. "Tell her I have the evidence. I have the pill. I have the motive. But I need to prove Beatrice is sane." "That is the problem," Harold Thorne said, his voice dropping. "As long as Beatrice is on that haloperidol, she will appear incompetent. Even if we get into court, if the judge asks her a question and she drools, we lose. The drug needs time to clear her system." "How long?" I asked. 48 hours for a significant improvement. If she stops taking it now, by Friday noon, she might be lucid enough to speak. But how are you going to stop the medication? That nurse watches her like a hawk. I looked at the grease stains on the concrete. I thought about the chemistry sets I used to buy for my grandson. I thought about the basic principles of engineering. If you can't stop the flow, you divert it. "I am going to swap the supply," I said. "I need you to tell me exactly what generic haloperidol looks like compared to something benign. Sugar pills, glucose, anything. Harold, that is dangerous. If she catches you, she won't catch me out." I cut him off, "because she thinks I am locked in my room. Call Sarah Jenkins. Tell her to be ready to storm the gates on Friday at noon, not a minute sooner. I need the element of surprise. I will call her," Thorne promised. "Be careful, Harold. You are a brave man. I am not brave, doctor. I am a husband." I hung up the phone. I didn't have time to feel relief. I had to get back. The run back to the house was a blur of pain. My adrenaline was crashing, and my legs felt like lead pipes. Every step sent a jolt of agony through my hip, but the image of Beatrice lying on the floor convulsing kept me moving. I wasn't running for myself. I was running for her. I reached the backyard just as the first hint of gray started to touch the eastern sky. I stood at the bottom of the drainage pipe looking up. Climbing down was hard. Climbing up at 71 with a head injury was bordering on impossible. But physics didn't care about my age, and neither did I. I wrapped my towel around the pipe again. I jammed the toe of my slipper into the bracket. I pulled. I groaned aloud as my muscles seized. I hauled myself up inch by agonizing inch. I slipped once, scraping my shin raw against the brick, but I held on. I thought about Nicole's smug face. I pulled harder. I thought about Derek's laugh. I pulled again. I reached the windowsill, my chest heaving, black spots dancing in my vision. I tumbled over the sill and onto the bathroom floor, collapsing onto the cold tiles. I lay there for a full minute, just breathing, listening to the silence of the house. I had made it. I stood up trembling and closed the window. I washed the dirt off my hands and face. I hid the towel in the bottom of the hamper. I checked the mirror. I looked like a ghost, pale and battered, but I was here. I unlocked the bathroom door and stepped into the bedroom. I needed to unlock the bedroom door from the inside to make it look like I had been there all along, just in case they checked. I walked across the room, my feet silent on the carpet. I reached for the handle, but before I could touch it, the handle turned. My heart stopped. The chair on the other side scraped against the floor as it was pulled away. I froze. I was standing in the middle of the room, fully dressed in my dirty pajamas, smelling of sweat and outside air. There was no time to get in bed, no time to pretend to sleep. The door swung open. Nicole stood there. She wasn't wearing her pajamas. She was dressed in her running clothes, looking fresh and sharp, holding a bottle of water. She didn't look surprised to see me awake. She looked curious. She leaned against the doorframe, crossing her arms over her chest. Her eyes traveled down to my muddy slippers, then up to my bruised forehead, and finally locked onto my eyes. She didn't scream. She didn't call for Derek. She just tilted her head slightly, a small, unreadable smile playing on her lips. "Did you have a nice walk, Dad?" she asked softly. The blood froze in my veins. She knew. She had known the whole time. The camera in the hallway. Sensors on the windows. Or had she just heard the old man wheezing as he climbed the wall? I don't know what you mean, I stammered, falling back on the only defense I had left. "Don't you?" she whispered, taking a step into the room. She closed the door behind her, sealing us in. "You always were a terrible liar. But that is okay. It makes Friday so much easier." She reached out and patted my cheek right over the bruise. "Get some sleep. You are going to need your energy for the show." She turned and walked out, the click of the lock echoing like a gunshot. I stood there in the dark, realizing with a terrifying certainty that the game had changed. She wasn't afraid of me escaping. She was counting on it. She thought my resistance was just another symptom she could use against me. She thought she was the cat playing with a mouse, but she had forgotten that even a mouse, when cornered, will go for the throat. I sat on the bed and began to untie my muddy shoes. The alliance was formed. The trap was set. Now I just had to survive the bait. Thursday morning arrived with the cold, gray light of an execution day. The house was no longer just a prison. It was a panopticon. I woke up to the sound of drilling in the living room. When I shuffled out of my bedroom playing the part of the confused geriatric, I saw Derek standing on a stepladder. He was mounting a sleek white camera in the corner of the ceiling, its black lens pointed directly at the hallway and the dining area. It was a high-definition Wi-Fi camera, the kind that sends alerts to a smartphone every time a dust mote settles on the floor. Nicole stood below him, arms crossed, watching the installation with a satisfied smirk. She saw me emerge and didn't even bother to hide her disdain. She pointed at the camera. "Smile, Dad," she said, her voice dripping with false cheer. "We are installing this for your safety. Now we can keep an eye on you and Mom 24/7, even when I am at the office." I looked at the unblinking eye of the camera. It was not for safety. It was for control. They knew I had been out of my room last night. They couldn't prove how, but they were determined to make sure it never happened again. I stared at the device, letting my mouth hang open slightly, feigning ignorance. "Is it a television?" I asked, my voice trembling. "No, Dad, it is a camera." Derek grunted, stepping down from the ladder. "So don't try any sleepwalking adventures. Okay, the motion sensor is sensitive." He pulled out his phone and checked the feed. The living room appeared on his screen in crisp detail. He laughed. "Crystal clear. I can even see the lint on your sweater, old man." I retreated to the kitchen, my mind racing. They thought technology was their ally. They forgot that before the internet, before Wi-Fi, before smart homes, there were engineers who built the infrastructure that made it all possible. They saw a camera. I saw a system with flaws. The camera had a blind spot. It covered the living room and the hallway entrance, but the angle was fixed. And like all consumer electronics, it had a reboot cycle. But I needed more than a reboot. I needed a loop. I needed 10 minutes of invisibility to save my wife's life. I spent the morning sitting in my armchair, staring at the wall while my mind deconstructed the problem. I had noticed something about the camera's placement. It was mounted directly above the heavy oak bookshelf, and on that bookshelf sat a framed panoramic photo of the living room taken 10 years ago. It was slightly outdated, but from a distance it was a convincing backdrop. I waited until Magda took her mid-morning bathroom break. Nicole and Derek were in the study, arguing about the listing price for the house. I had maybe 3 minutes to set the stage. I moved with a speed that would have shocked them. I grabbed the framed photo from the shelf. I reached up to the camera. I couldn't disable it without triggering an alert, but I could blind it. I used a piece of double-sided tape which I had palmed from the junk drawer earlier, and stuck the photo directly in front of the lens. On Derek's phone, the feed would show the living room. It would look still peaceful and empty. It was a crude analog hack, a loop made of paper and glass. But unless they looked closely at the timestamp or noticed the lack of shifting shadows it would hold. I had created my ghost window. Now came the most dangerous part of the operation, the chemistry set. I slipped into the kitchen. Magda kept the medication in a locked Tupperware container on the high shelf, thinking I couldn't reach it or wouldn't know what it was. She underestimated the determination of a desperate man. I used a chair to reach the shelf, wincing as my bruised ribs protested. I grabbed the container. The lock was a joke, a simple plastic latch. I popped it open. There they were. The blue pills. Haloperidol. The poison that was turning my brilliant wife into a vegetable. I took the bottle and moved to the counter. I opened the sugar jar. My hands were shaking, not from age, but from the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I needed to be precise. I poured a small pile of white sugar onto a napkin. Then I took the blue pills. They were capsules. Thank God they were capsules. I twisted the first one open. The blue powder inside spilled out. I swept it into the sink and washed it down with a blast of water. Then, using the tip of a steak knife, I carefully scooped the white sugar into the empty blue half of the capsule. I capped it. It clicked shut. One down. Twist. Dump. Scoop. Click. Twist. Dump. Scoop. Click. The rhythm became a mantra. For Beatrice. For Beatrice. For Beatrice. I worked feverishly. I heard the toilet flush down the hall. Magda was coming back. I had done 6 pills. That was enough for 2 days. I didn't have time to do the whole bottle. I shoved the real haloperidol powder down the drain and ran the disposal for a second to clear the evidence. I put the sugar-filled capsules back into the bottle, gave it a shake, and returned it to the Tupperware. I locked the container and put it back on the high shelf. I wiped the counter with my sleeve to remove any stray sugar crystals. I hopped down from the chair, just as Magda's heavy footsteps echoed on the tile. She walked into the kitchen, adjusting her scrubs. She looked at me suspiciously. I was standing by the sink, holding a glass of water, my hand trembling dramatically. I was thirsty, I stammered. Sit down, Magda grunted. You are in the way. I shuffled back to the living room. I reached up and pulled the photo off the camera lens, sliding it back onto the bookshelf in one fluid motion. The feed on Derek's phone would have shown a static room for 10 minutes, and now it would show the live room again. A glitch. A frozen frame. Nothing to worry about. I sat down, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Phase 1 was complete. Beatrice would be getting sugar tonight. Her mind would start to clear. But a clear mind wasn't enough to win a court case. We needed a confession. We needed to hear them say the quiet parts out loud. I needed ears in the walls. I waited until the afternoon. The house was quiet. Nicole had gone out to meet the cash buyer she had bragged about. Derek was napping on the sofa, exhausted from his own guilt. Magda was watching TV in the patient room with Beatrice. I went to the hall closet. Buried deep in the back behind the winter coats we never wore anymore was a cardboard box labeled Leo, my grandson. He had passed away 4 years ago from leukemia. He was 7. He was the light of my life, a budding engineer who loved to take things apart. This box contained his broken toys, the ones I had promised to fix, but never got around to. I pulled the box out, tears pricking my eyes. I opened it. There was his favorite talking robot, a remote-controlled car, a pair of walkie-talkies. I didn't see junk. I saw components. I took the box to my bedroom and locked the door. I used the small screwdriver from my eyeglass repair kit. I dismantled the robot first. Inside was a simple but effective microphone and a recording chip. I stripped it out. I did the same with the walkie-talkie. These were not high-tech spy gadgets. They were simple transmitters. But combined with the battery packs from the remote control car, I rigged 3 crude listening devices. They wouldn't transmit to a cloud. They would record locally to the small SD cards I had scavenged from my old digital camera collection. I held the 3 devices in my hand. They looked like bundles of wire and plastic wrapped in electrical tape. But they were my witnesses. I waited for nightfall. The darkness was my ally. When dinner was served, another silent, miserable affair, I put the first device into play. As I sat down, I pretended to drop my napkin. "Oops," I muttered. I bent down under the heavy oak dining table. I reached up and pressed the first bug against the underside of the table, securing it with a wad of industrial putty I had scraped from the window frame. This was where they held their meetings. This was where the sale would happen. 1 down. After dinner, while Nicole was in the shower, I shuffled into her bedroom. I knew she kept her phone on the nightstand. But I didn't aim for the phone. I aimed for the vent. The air return vent was near the floor, right next to her bed. I slid the second device through the slats. It would pick up her pillow talk. It would pick up her late-night confessions to Derek. 2 down. The third one was the riskiest. I needed to hear what Derek was doing when he left the house. I needed to know who he was meeting. I found his leather jacket hanging on the coat rack in the foyer. It was the jacket he wore everywhere. I felt the lining. There was a small tear in the inner pocket. I slipped the third bug, the smallest one harvested from a spy pen toy, into the lining of his jacket. It slid down deep, settling in the hem. He wouldn't feel it, but it would hear everything. Every conversation with his bookie, every threat, every panic attack. I returned to my room, my hands stained with dust and victory. I lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling. The camera in the living room was watching an empty hallway. The nurse was guarding a patient who was about to wake up. And the house was listening. I closed my eyes and whispered a thank you to Leo. My grandson was gone, but his toys were about to take down the monsters who were destroying his family. The cat had set its cameras, but the mouse had wired the maze. And tomorrow, the mouse was going to start biting back. Friday morning dawned with a pale, bruised light that filtered through the heavy curtains. It had been 48 hours since I swapped the blue pills for sugar. 48 hours of holding my breath. 48 hours of watching my wife like a hawk, praying for a sign that the woman I married was still in there somewhere, buried under layers of chemical sludge. The house was quiet, that deceptive stillness before a storm breaks. Magda was in the kitchen, banging pots and pans with her usual lack of grace. Nicole and Derek were locked in the study, probably rehearsing their lines for the judge who was due to arrive at noon. I sat by Beatrice's bedside, ostensibly to feed her breakfast, but in reality to search for a soul. For the first time in 3 years, her hands were resting on the quilt, without that terrible rhythmic tremor. They lay still, pale but steady. I reached out and covered her fingers with mine. Usually her skin felt cold and clammy, a side effect of the drugs slowing her circulation. Today there was a faint warmth, a spark. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever felt. I looked at her face. The mask-like rigidity that the haloperidol had forced upon her muscles was softening. The corner of her mouth twitched, not in a spasm, but in a genuine human micro-expression. "Beatrice," I whispered, leaning in so close my lips brushed her ear. "Can you hear me, Bea?" Her eyelids fluttered. It wasn't the heavy, drugged struggle of the past few days. It was a natural waking. Her lashes lifted, and for a heart-stopping second, I saw them. Her eyes. Not the glassy, vacant windows I had grown used to, but the sharp, intelligent hazel eyes that had captivated me across a college library 50 years ago. They scanned the room, confused at first, then focused. They locked onto my face. Recognition flooded in like the sun breaking through fog. "Harold," she breathed. The sound of my name on her lips, clear and unslurred, nearly broke me. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from sobbing aloud. Tears welled in my eyes, hot and stinging. She was back. The poison was leaving her system, and she was surfacing. "I am here, my love," I choked out, squeezing her hand. "I am right here." She tried to sit up, but her body was still weak from years of atrophy. She frowned, looking down at her hands, then at the unfamiliar room arrangement. "My head. It feels lighter," she said, her voice raspy but coherent. "Where are we? Why does it smell like bleach? You have been sick, Bae," I whispered urgently, glancing at the door. "But you are getting better. Listen to me. We do not have much time." She looked at me, really looked at me, and frowned at the bandage on my forehead. "Harold, you are hurt." "Who hurt you?" I shook my head. "It does not matter. Listen. Nicole and Derek, they are the ones doing this. They have been giving you the wrong medicine. That is why you were confused." Her eyes widened. The betrayal hit her instantly. She didn't question it. She was always sharp like that. She remembered the bitter water. She remembered Magda's rough hands. "Nicole," she whispered, a tear tracking down her temple. "Our Nicole." "Yes. They want the house, they want the money. And today at noon a judge is coming. They want to prove we are incompetent so they can lock us away." Beatrice's jaw tightened. The softness vanished, replaced by a steeliness I hadn't seen in a decade. Anger is a powerful antidote to fear. Over my dead body, she hissed. "Exactly," I said. "But Bea, you cannot show them you are better. Not yet." "Why?" "Let me tell them. Let me scream it in their faces." "No," I gripped her shoulders gently. "If they know you are lucid before the judge gets here, they will cancel the hearing. They will find another way. They might try to hurt you for real this time. We need to catch them in the act. We need the judge to see their lies firsthand." I took a deep breath, preparing to ask the hardest thing I had ever asked of her. "You have to act B. You have to pretend you are still sick. You have to be the vegetable they think you are, until I give the signal. Can you do that?" She looked at me, fear warring with determination in her eyes. It is a terrifying thing to ask someone to play the victim when they have just found their strength. But she nodded. A small, imperceptible nod. "I can do it," she whispered. "For us." "Good," I said. "Now close your eyes. Someone is coming." Footsteps thudded in the hallway. Heavy, arrogant. It was Derek. Beatrice instantly went limp against the pillows. Her mouth went slack, her eyes half closed and unfocused. It was a transformation so convincing it chilled me. She wasn't just my wife. She was a survivor. The door swung open. Derek stood there holding a clipboard. He looked stressed, sweat staining the armpits of his expensive dress shirt. He didn't even say hello, he just walked over to the bed and looked down at Beatrice with a mixture of disgust and impatience. "Is she fed?" he barked at me. I was just trying to get her to eat some oatmeal," I stammered, hunching my shoulders, reverting to my role as the useless old man. "She is not hungry. She has to eat," Derek snapped. "We can't have her fainting in front of the judge. It needs to look like we take good care of her, remember?" He leaned over the bed, his face inches from hers. Beatrice didn't flinch. She stared past him at the wall, her breathing shallow and rhythmic. "Hey, Brenda," he said, using the wrong name on purpose, a petty cruelty he enjoyed. "Wakey, wakey." Beatrice moaned low in her throat, a sound of pure distress that sounded entirely genuine. "She looks different," Derek muttered, narrowing his eyes. My heart hammered against my ribs. What did he see? Was her color too good? Were her eyes too clear? "She usually has that twitch," Derek said, waving his hand vaguely. "Her head usually shakes." "Why isn't she shaking?" I gripped the bedsheet. He was noticing the lack of side effects. The haloperidol tremors were gone. "She is tired," I offered weakly. "She had a bad night." Derek didn't buy it. He was paranoid. Guilt does that to a man. He leaned closer, peering into her eyes. Beatrice kept her gaze fixed on the middle distance, not blinking, even as his face loomed over her. "And she is dry," Derek observed. "Usually there is drool on the pillow. She looks too clean." He reached out. I saw his hand moving toward her arm. He wasn't going to pat her. He was going to test her. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice rising in panic. "Shut up, old man," Derek said. He grabbed the fleshy part of Beatrice's upper arm, and he twisted. It wasn't a gentle pinch. It was a cruel, hard pinch designed to elicit a reaction. He dug his nails in. I saw the skin turn white under his fingers. It had to hurt like hell. I almost lunged at him. Every instinct in my body screamed to tackle him, to smash his face into the floorboards. But I froze. If I moved, the game was over. If I fought him now, he would call off the hearing. He would sedate her by force. We would lose the war. I looked at Beatrice. She didn't move. She didn't gasp. She didn't pull away. She lay there completely immobile, staring at the dust motes dancing in the light. Only I, who knew every inch of her face, saw the tiny tightening of her jaw muscle, the only sign of the agony she was enduring. She took the pain. She absorbed it. She turned it into fuel. Derek held the pinch for 3 long seconds. 1, 2, 3. Then he let go. He looked at her arm where a red mark was already forming. He looked at her face. Nothing. "Huh," he grunted, straightening up. "I guess the brain rot is deeper than we thought. She can't even feel pain anymore." He wiped his hand on his pants, looking satisfied. "That is good. That is perfect. The judge will see she is totally gone." He turned to me, grinning. "Make sure she stays clean, Harold. Noon. Don't be late. And fix your hair. You look like a homeless person." He walked out, whistling a tuneless melody. As soon as the door clicked shut, I collapsed onto the edge of the bed, burying my face in my hands. I was shaking. I was shaking with a rage so pure it felt like it could melt steel. I wanted to kill him. I truly did. Beatrice let out a long, shuddering breath. She turned her head toward me. She rubbed her arm where the red mark was deepening into a bruise. "Did I do okay?" she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. I looked at her. My brave, incredible wife. She had just endured torture to save us. "You were perfect," I whispered, kissing her forehead right over the worry lines. "You were absolutely perfect." She looked at the bruise on her arm. "He is going to pay for that, isn't he, Harold?" I stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the driveway where the cars were starting to arrive. I saw a black sedan pull up. It was the judge. "Yes," I said, my voice cold and hard. "He is going to pay for everything." I turned back to her. The time for hiding was over. The stage was set. "Get ready, Beatrice. It is showtime." I went to the closet and pulled out my old suit. It was a bit moth-eaten, and it hung loosely on my frame now, but it was the suit I wore when I accepted the Engineer of the Year award 20 years ago. I put it on. I tied the tie with steady hands. I slicked back my hair. I wasn't dressing for a funeral. I was dressing for court. I walked over to the wheelchair. I helped Beatrice into it. She went limp again as I lifted her, falling back into character. I tucked a blanket around her legs, hiding the bruise on her arm for now. That would be Exhibit B. The bruise on my forehead was Exhibit A. "We are ready," I said to the silent room. I pushed the wheelchair toward the door. The wheels squeaked slightly on the hardwood. It sounded like a battle cry. We rolled into the hallway, moving toward the living room, where the cameras were watching, where the microphones were listening, and where the trap was waiting to be sprung. The awakening had happened in secret. Now the reckoning would happen in public. The living room of my home had been transformed into a theater of cruelty. By noon on Friday, the furniture I had built with my own hands was pushed against the walls to make room for a long folding table that looked like it belonged in a bingo hall. Judge Kincaid sat behind it, wearing his black robes, which seemed ridiculous in a suburban living room, but he wore them like armor. He was a heavy man, with a red face and eyes that shifted constantly, never landing on anything for more than a second. He smelled of stale cigar smoke and expensive cologne, the scent of a man who was used to getting his way. To his right sat David Nicole's lawyer, a man with a smile so sharp it could cut glass. And then there was Nicole. My daughter was giving the performance of her life. She was dressed in modest black, as if she were already mourning us. She sat on the sofa across from the judge, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue, her voice trembling with practiced sorrow. Derek stood behind her, his hand on her shoulder, playing the supportive husband, while his eyes kept darting toward the safe in the study. Beatrice and I were parked in the corner, like pieces of broken furniture. I was in my old suit, the bandage on my forehead throbbing under the harsh lights they had set up. Beatrice was slumped in her wheelchair, her chin on her chest, a blanket tucked around her legs to hide the bruise Derek had given her. She looked small. She looked gone. It took every ounce of my will not to reach out and squeeze her hand to signal that the cavalry was coming. "Your Honor." Nicole said, her voice catching in her throat. "It breaks my heart to do this. Really, it does. But you can see the state they are in. Mom has not recognized me in months. And Dad, well, after the incident yesterday where he became violent and injured himself, I just do not feel they are safe living alone anymore." Kincaid nodded gravely, pretending to take notes. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at the medical records. He just looked at the envelope sitting on the edge of the table, the one I knew contained his $20,000 bribe. "It is a tragedy, Mrs. Sutton," Kincaid rumbled, his voice deep and bored. "But it is clear that immediate intervention is necessary. The court appreciates you stepping up to take this burden." He picked up a stack of documents. These were the papers. The conservatorship. The death warrant for our freedom. "Mr. Foster," Kincaid said, finally turning his watery gaze on me, "I have reviewed the petition. Given your wife's advanced catatonic state and your own cognitive decline, the court finds it in the best interest of both parties to transfer all financial and medical decision-making powers to your daughter, Nicole Sutton." He didn't ask me if I understood. He didn't ask me for my side of the story. He just slid the papers across the table along with a heavy gold-plated pen. "Sign here, Mr. Foster. It is the only way to ensure your wife gets the care she needs." The room went silent. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall and the heavy breathing of the judge. I looked at the papers. I saw the clauses. Power to liquidate assets. Power to determine residence. Power to withhold life support. It was all there in black and white. I reached out and took the pen. My hand shook. I let it shake. I wanted them to see the tremor. I wanted them to feel safe. Nicole let out a breath she had been holding. She leaned forward, her eyes hungry. Derek grinned, a flash of teeth that looked predatory. They were already spending the money. They were already remodeling the kitchen in their heads. I brought the pen to the paper. The tip hovered over the signature line. "Harold, sign it," Derek urged, his voice tight. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." I looked up. I looked at Nicole. "You promise?" I said, my voice cracking. "You promise you will take care of her?" Nicole nodded vigorously, tears streaming down her face. "Of course, Daddy. I promise. I will take care of everything." I looked at the judge. "And you, Your Honor. You believe this is justice?" Kincaid checked his watch. "Mr. Foster, the court's time is valuable. Sign the papers." I gripped the pen tighter. The metal bit into my skin. This was the moment. The pivot point, the fulcrum upon which the rest of our lives would turn. I took a deep breath. I straightened my back. The tremor in my hand stopped instantly. The confusion in my eyes vanished, replaced by the cold, hard stare of a man who had stared down structural failures and saved skyscrapers from collapsing. "I will sign," I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming steady and resonant. "But first, there is one piece of evidence the court needs to hear." Nicole's smile faltered. What is he talking about?" I didn't answer her. I placed the pen down on the table with a deliberate, sharp click. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my smartphone. Not the brick they gave me. My smartphone. The one I had recovered from Derek's jacket pocket while he was sleeping 2 hours ago. I tapped the screen. I connected to the Bluetooth speaker I had hidden behind the heavy velvet drapes directly behind the judge's head. "What is this?" Kincaid demanded, looking around. I pressed play. The sound of static filled the room, followed by a voice. It wasn't a whisper. It was amplified, booming through the living room with crystal clarity. It was Nicole's voice. "Just make sure she takes the blue pills, Magda. If she is not dead by the 1st of the month, we are screwed." The color drained from Nicole's face so fast she looked like a corpse. She froze, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on a hook. The recording continued. "The insurance policy pays out $2 million if it is natural causes. Haloperidol toxicity looks just like heart failure in old people. No one will know." Derek scrambled backward, knocking over a vase. "What the hell? Where is that coming from?" I didn't stop. I let it play. "And what about the old man?" That was Derek's voice. "Dad. He is useless. Once I have the signature, we dump him at Sunset Haven. Let him rot in the state ward. I am selling this house Monday morning." The recording ended with the sound of them laughing. A cruel, dismissive laugh that echoed in the silent room. Kincaid pushed his chair back, the legs screeching against the floor. He looked from the speaker to me, his eyes wide with panic. He knew exactly what this meant. He was an accessory to conspiracy to commit murder. This is preposterous," Nicole shrieked, jumping to her feet. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "He edited that. It is fake. He is using AI. My father is insane, Your Honor. You can't believe a word of this." She looked at me with pure hatred. "You senile old fool, you think this little stunt will save you? Mom is a vegetable. Even if you have a recording, you can't prove anything. She is gone." She turned to the judge, desperate. "Look at her. Look at my mother. She doesn't even know where she is." All eyes turned to Beatrice. She was still slumped in her chair, her head down. Nicole took a step toward her, emboldened. "Mom, tell them you are sick." And then it happened. The moment I had prayed for. The moment that justified every risk, every lie, every drop of blood. Beatrice's head lifted. It didn't lift slowly or weakly. It snapped up. She sat up straight, her spine aligning with a regal grace that made the wheelchair look like a throne. She pulled the blanket off her legs and let it fall to the floor. She looked at Nicole. Her eyes were not cloudy. They were burning with a fire that could consume the world. She didn't look at the judge. She didn't look at Derek. She looked directly at her daughter. "You are wrong, Nicole," Beatrice said. Her voice was not a whisper. It was strong. It was the voice of the woman who had raised this family, the woman who had run a household, the woman who had taught Nicole how to read. "I know exactly where I am," Beatrice continued, her diction perfect, cutting through the air like a knife. "I am in my home, and I am looking at a stranger." Nicole gasped, stepping back as if she had been slapped. "Mom, do not call me that," Beatrice said, her voice dropping to a deadly calm. "A daughter does not poison her mother. A daughter does not plot to sell her father into a state ward." Beatrice turned to the judge. Kincaid was sweating profusely now, gathering his papers, trying to find an exit strategy. "Your Honor," she said, "my name is Beatrice Foster. I am of sound mind. I have been forcibly medicated with haloperidol for 3 years against my will. My husband has the toxicology report from an independent lab." "And that man," she pointed a steady finger at Derek, "bruised my arm this morning to test if I was brain dead. I am not. I felt every second of it. And I am going to make sure you feel every second of your sentence." The room erupted. Nicole started screaming, a primal, terrified sound. She lunged toward the table to grab the papers, to tear them up, to destroy the evidence. "No. You can't do this. This is my house, but, I was ready." I stepped forward, blocking her path. I wasn't the frail old man anymore. I was the wall. I stood tall, my chest expanding, casting a shadow over her. "Sit down, Nicole," I commanded. My voice boomed with the authority of a site foreman. She stopped. She looked up at me, truly seeing me for the first time in years. She saw the rage. She saw the power. She saw her father. And then the front door crashed open. "Police, nobody move." Sarah Jenkins, the lawyer. Dr. Thorne had called, walked in flanked by 4 uniformed officers and Dr. Thorne himself. She looked at the judge, then at Nicole, and smiled a smile that was all teeth. "Judge Kincaid," Sarah said smoothly, "I suggest you remain seated. The state attorney is very interested in your bank records. And Mrs. Sutton," she held up a pair of handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent. Though honestly, I hope you keep talking. It will make the trial so much shorter." I looked at Beatrice. She was crying now, but they were tears of relief. I walked over to her and took her hand. We watched as the officers grabbed Nicole and Derek. We watched as the fortress they tried to steal crumbled around them, not because of a bulldozer, but because of the truth. The judgment day had arrived, and the verdict was ours. The chaos that followed was efficient and absolute. The 4 uniformed officers moved into the living room with the precision of a tactical unit, their presence instantly shattering the illusion of the civil court proceeding Nicole had tried to orchestrate. Sarah Jenkins stood by the door, her arms crossed, watching the scene unfold with the cold satisfaction of a hunter who had finally trapped her prey. She didn't need to shout orders. A simple nod to the sergeant was enough. 2 officers moved toward Derek, who was still backed against the wall, hyperventilating. The other 2 flanked Nicole, cutting off her path to the table where the incriminating documents lay. But the final blow didn't come from a badge. It came from a lab coat. Dr. Thorne stepped through the front door, looking tired but triumphant. He held a tablet in his hand, the screen glowing with a complex medical chart. He walked straight to the judge's table, ignoring Kincaid's sputtered protests, and turned the screen so everyone could see. "Here is the confirmation," Thorne announced, his voice steady. "I just received the expedited results from the blood draw I took 48 hours ago, compared with a sample taken this morning. 2 days ago, Beatrice Foster's blood showed toxic levels of haloperidol. Today, her levels have dropped by 90%. The correlation with her sudden return to lucidity is undeniable. This was not dementia, Your Honor. This was poisoning." Nicole let out a sound that was half scream, half sob. She lunged for the tablet, her manicured claws reaching for the evidence, but an officer caught her wrist mid-air. The click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound in the room. It was a mechanical snap that signaled the end of her reign. "You do not understand," Nicole shrieked, struggling against the officer's grip. "I was trying to save the house. I was trying to save us from bankruptcy. It was his idea." She whipped her head around, her eyes wild, pointing her chin at Derek. "He is the one with the gambling debt. He is the one who owes the loan sharks. He told me we had to sell the house or they would kill us. I just wanted to keep everyone safe." Derek, who was being patted down by the other officers, looked up with a face wet with tears and sweat. His bravado had completely evaporated, leaving behind a pathetic, trembling coward. "You liar," Derek yelled back, his voice cracking. "You said your parents were useless. You said the old man was a waste of space. You planned the whole medical chart. You printed the fake labels. I watched them turn on each other." It was pathetic. The united front they had presented for years, the perfect couple who just wanted to help, dissolved instantly under the weight of consequences. They weren't partners. They were just two rats in a cage biting each other to survive. Officer Sarah Jenkins interrupted, her voice cutting through the screaming. "Make sure you note that Mr. Sutton just confessed to a motive involving loan sharks, and Mrs. Sutton just admitted to knowledge of the medical manipulation. I believe that is enough for conspiracy to commit murder and elder abuse." Judge Kincaid, realizing his courtroom had become a crime scene, tried to make himself invisible. He gathered his robes and picked up his briefcase, attempting to slip past the commotion toward the front door. He kept his head down, refusing to make eye contact with me or the police. "I have another hearing," Kincaid muttered to no one in particular. "I must be going. This is a domestic matter." He reached the threshold, but he didn't get far. Sarah Jenkins stepped in front of him, blocking the exit. She wasn't a large woman, but in that moment she looked like a giant. She pulled a folded document from her blazer pocket and held it up. "Not so fast." "Your Honor," Sarah said, her smile sharp enough to draw blood. "I took the liberty of contacting the State Ethics Committee this morning. They are very interested in the $20,000 wire transfer that hit your offshore account an hour ago. And since I am a sworn officer of the court, I am placing you under citizen's arrest for obstruction of justice and accepting a bribe until the state troopers arrive." Kincaid's red face went pale. He dropped his briefcase. It hit the floor with a heavy thud, sounding like a gavel banging a final sentence. I sat there holding Beatrice's hand, watching the demolition of our enemies. It didn't feel like triumph. It felt like relief. It felt like the pressure in a boiler finally being released before the explosion. As the police led Nicole out, she looked back at me one last time. Her face was a mask of confusion, as if she still couldn't understand how her perfect plan had failed. "Why," she whispered, "you were just a confused old man." I looked at her, the daughter I had raised, the stranger she had become. "I am an engineer, Nicole," I said softly. "And you forgot the first rule of construction. If the foundation is strong, the house doesn't fall." The door closed behind them. The siren lights flashed against the living room walls, red and blue, washing away the shadows of the last 3 years. 6 months have passed since that day. The seasons have changed, and so have we. We sold the house last week. It wasn't a foreclosure. It wasn't a fire sale to pay a bookie. It was a calm, calculated decision made over Sunday morning coffee. We realized that the house, as much as we loved it, was a monument to a past that was over. The memories were in the walls, yes, but the trauma was there too. I couldn't walk into the kitchen without seeing the spot where I crushed the blue pills. Beatrice couldn't look at the dining table without remembering the bruise on her arm. So we sold it to a young couple who wanted to raise a family. We sold it for market value, putting the money exactly where it belonged in our own bank account, under our own names. We used a portion of the funds to buy a Winnebago. It is a 30-foot recreational vehicle with a king-sized bed and a kitchenette that Beatrice loves. She is doing much better now. The doctors say her cognitive function is back to 90%. The tremors are gone. She paints watercolors again, sitting at the small table in the RV as we watch the American landscape roll by. Right now we are parked on the edge of the Grand Canyon. It is funny. I lied to Derek about looking for photos of this place in the basement, but now we are actually here. The red rocks stretch out forever, vast and indifferent and beautiful. The wind is cold, but it is a clean wind. It doesn't smell of bleach or deception. I spend my mornings maintaining the engine. I check the oil. I tighten the belts. I listen to the hum of the machine. It is a good machine. It takes us where we want to go. Nicole and Derek are currently awaiting trial. The state prosecutor is not offering a plea deal. The recording I made was admissible evidence, and combined with Dr. Thorne's testimony, they are looking at 15 to 20 years. Beatrice and I decided not to visit them. We sent a lawyer to convey our message. We hope they find peace, but they will never find us. We established the Foster Trust, a legal fund designed to help elderly people fight abusive conservatorships. We want to make sure that no other son or daughter can weaponize the legal system against the people who gave them life. As I sit here looking into the camera lens to record this final entry, I want to talk to you. Yes, you. The person listening to this while you drive to work, or while you cook dinner, or while you sit in a house that feels a little too quiet. And most importantly, heavily underestimate the power of a quiet person. They thought I was deaf. They thought I was blind. They thought I was finished. But an old building can still stand through a hurricane if the steel is good. My name is Harold Foster. I am 71 years old. I am a husband. I am an engineer. And I am free. Thank you for listening to my story. If it made you angry, or if it gave you hope, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. You never know who might be trapped in their own home waiting for a sign to fight back. Subscribe to the channel for more stories of truth and justice. Until next time, keep your eyes open and keep your foundations strong.